We're live. It is, what is the date? It is Thursday, July 23rd or something like that. 5 o'clock p.m. And I don't think I can hear anybody. Kate, talk so I can see if I can hear you.
Hi, Ben.
Oh, I can hear you.
Okay.
All right. I am here at the Cabin in the Woods. I'm not using my normal computer because Baby Cannon destroyed it, or maybe Baby Prosecco destroyed it. I am sitting on the brink of a thunderstorm. It could start pouring at any moment. And so if I pick up all of a sudden and run inside, that is because it has started raining. We are not allowed to have fun anymore, although it is marginally cooler here than it is in Washington. So to everybody who's stuck in Washington, but in lieu of fun, we have Andy Slavitt, who I just want to say, I am not sure there is anybody who we have had more requests to have on the show, with the possible exception of Ann Applebaum. But unlike Ann Applebaum, Andy Slavitt does not live in Poland. And so there isn't a prohibitive time difference between us and Andy Slavitt. Where are you joining us from, Andy?
Minneapolis.
Right. So it's only an hour off. He's drinking at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, which is shocking. Welcome to In Lieu of Fun.
Very happy to have you here.
Great to be here.
So, Ben, you want to get us started?
Sure. I want to start with the same question I asked Josh Sharfstein the other day about the COVID crisis. Is there any reason to think we are less fucked than it really seems like we are in this? What are, if any, silver linings to the clouds? Why shouldn't I be in rank despair?
Well, Josh is such a pretender. I'm shocked that you listened to anything he had to say.
Josh was my chemistry partner in high school.
That's cool. He's great.
We were buds. We've been buds since we were like 15.
And he knows what he's talking about.
Yeah. So he said there were some reasonable silver linings here. Yeah. What do you think?
Well, look, at this point, we're in self-inflicted territory almost entirely. The virus, as bad as it was and is, and the damage it remains doing, when it came here in February and March, even allowing for a bad start, which we had, as everyone knows, we should have had it under control by now. The vast majority of the world has figured out how to have it under control, and we haven't. So that's either, depending on how you look at it, either reason for a lot of optimism, because it is controllable, or a lot of pessimism, because we have not done it. And we've not done it not because we don't know how. I mean, we were born with the gifts to avoid this virus. And the virus is not so tricky. It's not like it morphs around our every move. It doesn't know like some martial art. It just does its thing. And that thing becomes predictable over time. And over time, you have to be a pretty either stubborn or lack certain skills in order to be in the situation that we're in. Now, once you're in it, it feels hard to get out of because you can't count the cases, you can't control them, it's spreading uncontrollable. But once you control it, like every country from Japan to the Czech Republic to Singapore to Malaysia to Vietnam to New Zealand, Germany have done, you can contain it. So we got to get serious, and we get serious. I think we can contain it. There's no reason it should be doing this kind of damage.
And what does getting serious mean at this point? I mean, when you had minimal or limited community spread, getting serious meant locking down sufficiently to reach the peak of the curve, see it on a sustained downward slope, and then you get into contact tracing and suppression territory. Now you're talking about 70,000 new cases a day. I suppose you could still do that, but you're going to have a degree of before you get into the area where you can contemplate doing contact tracing for every new case. You've got to get on such a steep and sustained decline. So what is the right, like, assuming we had national policy, what would be the right national policy at this point?
It actually starts with just giving a shit. I mean, that's
step one, give a shit.
Give a shit. I mean, we have 140,000 people who've died. Like, if we started to care today about the 140,000 in first, right, we'd be able to do something about it. So some of it is tactical stuff, and you called it out, and it's not mysterious. It's probably doing it a little more severely than we did it. So when we thought we were on lockdown, for example, I talked to the state health secretary in California yesterday, and I said, when you were on lockdown, what percentage of your population was actually not on lockdown, i.e., essential services, farm labor, et cetera? 60%. So Americans think we had the virus circulating in states anywhere from 30 to 60%. So that's why we only went down to 20,000 cases a day and didn't go further. So we give a shit. We get a little more serious, and it doesn't have to be just staying home. Masking does work. High quality masks using the DPA is a much better idea than kind of like someone throwing a scarf over their face. But you're right. You got to say again. Yeah.
Being outdoors,
right? All three of us outdoors. There's and what's happened in the southern states will happen to the winter states, the northern states in the winter. We don't act on it. So, and then there's a certain kind of failure of imagination that we have in this country where it's like, oh, it happened in New York, but I'm in Texas and it hasn't happened here, so it's not going to come here. And then it comes there and it's like, oh, wow. But
right.
It's because we forget that the virus is just a logical beast. It just does what it does. It goes from bigger city to smaller city, and it keeps going until you stop spreading it. And you stop spreading it when you stop transmitting it, which means a mask or avoiding people. It's not that complicated. I mean, they've done it, and again, in all these countries around the world.
All right. So one other question on that, though, because you've identified, I think, correctly, step one. But step one is unachievable under current circumstances, because if we know anything, it is that our current leadership actually doesn't give a shit. And that's at quite a literal level. I mean, the president says on a routine basis, it'll just disappear. It'll just go away. He dreams up magical therapies, whether it's hydroxychloroquine or bleach or ultraviolet light. None of that comports with my, granted, giving a shit is a loosely defined term under all circumstances, but none of that meets even a reasonable loose definition. So the most we're going to see is a bunch of governors giving a shit at a state level. And I guess the question is, in the presence of a failure of step one, what's the backup plan for that?
Yeah, it's a lot harder. There's no question about it. But I think it's a couple things. One is on the local and state political leaders, and there are some weak links there. But if you ask nothing else of them, I mean, look, a lot of these folks were not meant to be wartime leaders. They thought this was a step to the presidential debate stage, and lo and behold, they got people dying on their hands. So I'd like to see some governors who care more about people dying than getting reelected. And if you don't have that, then you don't get there. Because if you do have that, and I'll give governors some partial credit. Greg Abbott, late to the game, but he put a mask requirement and he closed the bars. I've been calling northern states and cities all day long the last couple of weeks to get them to close the bars because it's going to happen there. So part of it is I would just call it adapt. You literally know how to learn from what happened in another state and have the imagination to say, I don't want Arizona happening here in Minnesota. Therefore, I'm not going to make those mistakes. And local leaders can do that. They need to take those lessons. And then from the rest of us, there's another chip I just would add, which is the more that this feels like it happens to other people, people in the Black community, people in the Latinx community, older people, people in nursing homes, people who have pre-existing conditions, the more people kind of let their shoulders down and go, it's not me. I'm a 24-year-old. I know I don't look 24, but I'm a 24-year-old, and therefore our empathy chip isn't quite what it is in other countries, perhaps. And I think we need all those things at work if we're going to combat this.
So one of the things that you keep bringing up, which I think, and it kind of goes to this is happening to other people. Well, other people is an imaginary line that you draw in your head. Borders are actually imaginary lines that we've kind of created. And you described the virus as kind of logical, but I would say that the virus is not logical. The virus is passive, self-perpetuating organism that is going to logically follow whatever the path of least resistance is.
Right.
The virus itself has no hive mind or something like that. And so the idea here is yes, we are the better evolved species to figure this out. What happened in this state happens in that state, which brings me to my question is what I find so baffling is that people saw everything that was happening in all of these places and saw that it was kind of traveling and how it was traveling and how it was spreading. There wasn't a stop in the spread. There was maybe a small gap or a slowdown before the South really kind of surged and had their own outbreaks. But I'm really curious, do we attribute all of this to a lack of federal leadership or a lack of government leadership? Is not some part of this people knew and could have listened and could have at that point in April and May knew exactly some of the best practices? I give everyone a pass for February and March and early April, right? I remember so clearly hearing that the wash your hands songs and that was all anyone cared, and not to wear masks, actually.
Right.
And so there's all of these kinds of moments, but by the end of by April and May, what is your excuse? Why did I almost there's almost a Darwin Award for it or something if it didn't end up affecting everyone else around you.
Right. So you think about what culturally makes us the country we are, individualism, distrust of government, freedom, liberty, our rights, all those things we value. But if those are our strengths, they're the wrong strengths to bring to this game. So this game requires cooperation, community, putting others in front of yourself, empathy, all those things. And that's where leadership is important, because it's hard, because it requires a change. And so if it requires a change and it's difficult, and someone is willing to confuse the message, and someone's willing to give you an out, because people are fearful. I mean, there's no question people are fearful. And by the way, losing your business is shitty, right? So if your lived experience is not that I know someone who died of coronavirus, I live in New York, but it's I live in Iowa and my friend lost his restaurant, that's worthy of the same level of empathy. But that's where it takes great leadership to come in and say, if we want to get through this as quickly as possible and get your restaurant open and get people back to work and save lives, this is what we have to do. So it's, we're without that leadership, people will devolve to whatever state they believe is easiest or they can justify. And it's hard, it just makes it harder.
Yeah. So question, if we're in an environment in which each individual state is kind of on its own, I mean, there's some federal support, but there's not federal leadership, and states are competing for resources. And unlike European states, they can't close their borders to people from other states, though they can ask them to quarantine as a functional matter. They can't they can't force it, at least not at scale. To what extent is the individual governors have some capacity, but at the end of the day, it's like it's a little bit like environmental pollution, like air pollution, right? I mean, it simply doesn't respect the locations that it was sourced from. So I guess the question is, in the absence of federal leadership, how much can you reasonably expect governors to do?
Well, so those issues would still be there with federal leadership. And so you'd still need the kind of state level coordination. And you said it earlier, when you have such vast community spread and you're only testing 1 out of 10 or 1 out of 8 disease, it's hopeless. It might, I just got off the phone with the head of CVS. He told me they have a 9-day backlog when they send a test in. It doesn't even pay to get tested any longer. So we just have to assume it's just everywhere. That's a situation you can't control. But if you could get it to the point, Ben, where you had embers and that you can contain into small, you're always going to have cases. You're always going to have the guy who went from New Jersey to Virginia to visit his grandmother.
We still have bubonic plague.
Yeah. So we're not trying to say this should be completely eradicated off the country. What we're saying is you should be able to count the number of cases on 1 or 2 hands, contact trace around them, and make everybody feel safe enough to go to work because they know that it's not all around them. And, there are parts of the country, New Jersey and New York and Connecticut, tri-state, other parts where there's a lot of cross-border traffic. Those governors just need to work together and have the same set of policies, which they are in a lot of those cases. But you could be doing so much more. I mean, I talked to a health secretary yesterday. He told me that they were running out of beds to transport people to, and I said, well, what about Colorado? Because Colorado was a couple states away. They've got tons of beds open, and they're like, oh, I should call the secretary there. And it's like,
this is what I mean by borders being imaginary. Just like draw a giant circle around where you are, and then call everyone in that area. Right.
In Arizona, you know how many times they called California to ask for help? 0.
And is that fundamentally a political thing that Ducey and Newsom are not on good terms, or is it an ideological thing? How do you understand that?
I understand it as a PR thing. The image of Ducey asking help of California with just an image he didn't want. And again, this is where I'm like, don't be governor. Like, if you care about something else more than people dying, that's fine. Just don't be governor, because that's not your job.
So which of the governors, when you look around the country, have been the best? I mean, I have been consistently impressed with the performance of New Mexico relative to its adjacent states. Cuomo impressed a lot of people in his briefings, but he also made some genuinely lousy decisions at the outset. Who has really shown well as a governor in this whole, from end to end in this episode?
Yeah. So first of all, just to comment at Grisham, you're right. It's a poor state with a lot of spread on the tribal territories, and she's done a good job. I think she's a good governor. Let me start with this comment. Like, David Frum made an interesting comment to me, which is it's almost impossible to get an A as a politician because you're going to piss somebody off. You got to make hard choices, but it's really, really easy to get a B. I mean, to get a B, you need to listen to the scientists. You need to show some degree of empathy. You need to be on the job, and you need to be making tough decisions. And obviously the president didn't even come close to that. But I'd say, there's a number of governors that have done quite a good job. Charlie Baker in Massachusetts has done a very good job. Hogan in Maryland's done a good job. I think Cuomo on the backside,
Yes.
his slope of that, the steepness of that slope was impressive.
Yeah.
That was all Cuomo being a hard ass. Newsom's done a good job. Inslee's done a good job. Pritzker's done a good job. And it's not because necessarily they're
Bullock.
Bullock's done a good job.
But yeah, anyway. So few people in that state, but still.
Right. But he's done a good job by all 10 of them. Look, I have some sympathy. Like, I mean, Kemp had to sue people. Kemp had to both not know that it spread asymptomatically, and he had to sue the cities in his own state. That's impressive. I mean, that's trying really, really hard. In Florida, DeSantis had to literally look into the camera and say, "Screw you, we don't have a problem here." I mean, like, if you just don't do that, I'll give you a C. If you just avoid proactively being an idiot, you can get a C. But to get a B takes a little bit of work. You can be a little late to the party. To listen to people, communicate with your constituents, make tough decisions, listen to scientists. All these folks grapple. I mean, I will tell you who's done great is Murphy and Lamont have been great. Here's an example. Murphy will call me, or Lamont will call me if something bad happens in Arizona. They'll pick up the phone and say, "Do you think that could happen here?" And
what's your response? Yes, probably.
It depends on the issue, but the fact that they're watching every other state.
Yeah. And
like we haven't seen that before. Is that something we could see here? Right. And then maybe yes, maybe no, but they're so actively, like, you can hear it in their voices. You live through what they live through, and like, you're not the same again. And if you have any decency, you all those people died in your state.
All right, before we go to questions, we have a question on the YouTube channel. I am instructed to ask you about how you came into public service in the Obama administration, and assured that it is a particularly good and moving story. So I follow my instructions from the YouTube channel. How'd you get into this racket?
You really want story? You want long stories? No, you don't want long stories.
Yes, we do. We're all about in lieu of fun, and in lieu of fun are long stories.
Yeah. So I don't know which story whoever asked the question is referring to, but I came to the Obama administration when the ACA tanked, and remember that?
Yep.
Yeah.
No, I forgot.
So I called Washington and literally asked if they needed any help. This was on a Tuesday. And of course, when you make a phone call like that, you assume it's going to go unreturned. By Friday, they announced that I was going to be the lead firefighter turning around healthcare.gov.
Be careful what you wish for.
Yeah. I think I was the only one in the country that must have called. And so I led that turnaround, and then, which was crazy. Lived out of a hotel in Washington, and then the president asked if I would stay and serve out the rest of the term after we did the turnaround.
It's an amazing story. A huge number of people have health care today because of it.
Yeah.
Tony Pava, the floor is yours.
Hello, and oh my God, I feel heard seeing Andy on the show. You've been great. Your podcast is incredible. Your son's amazing, and you are basically writing history in a book in real time. It's going to be great. So I guess I thought Ben had already kind of addressed this, but I'll throw it out there anyway. My thought is I live in Washington State, which in my opinion has been well governed by Jay Inslee pretty much from the beginning. And so how do we stop? This is, like Kate and Ben were saying, this is an international thing, doesn't know borders, but how do well-governed states really, how can they control the virus when you have poorly run states, frankly, with Republican governorship, just letting things run amok. And anyone who wants to get on an airplane can fly to anywhere they want. And so I'm just wondering what would be your advice about around that? How do you kind of respond nationally when we have a state by state kind of protocol going on?
As soon as they let you into Canada, you should go. No, so first of all, you got the rain on your side. I mean, you got to keep wishing people away. I had a governor tell, and it wasn't Inslee. He asked me, he said, we're doing a really good job. We don't know about the case growth. I'm like, yeah, no one wants to come to your state. That's why you're fine. He was like, hey, I'm like, yeah, there's worse things right now. But the truth is you're going to have spread. It's going to happen. The trick is to have it so under control that you're testing frequently enough that you're finding it very quickly. You're able to contact trace it, and you're able to ring fence it. So if you ended up in a world where you're like, I mean, someone told me like in Singapore they had like 37 cases and it's like a national emergency. Everyone's freaking out. So if you ended up like in Washington someday and you're like, we have 14 cases today. Like, remember we were like that not that long ago. I was like, oh my God, we have 14 cases. What are we going to do? Who do they know? Who are they going to touch? I wonder if they're going to come near me. When we're back to that place again, but with resources, this will be easy to control. So today, you can't do that when it's like, oh, we've got 22 states that have over 1,000 new cases a day. That's insane. I mean, that's insane. And it's insane that we're used to it. It's insane that we're like, oh yeah, that's fine. And it's probably 10 times more of that, but that's fine too.
Yeah. We were in Brooklyn in like, what was it? Early March? Yeah. Like late February, early March. We'd been watching it really closely in South Korea, then in Italy, over January and into February. My partner and I kind of looked at each other and we're like, I don't know. There was just kind of this, like, the outbreak had just kind of happened in Washington State, and then in California was happening. And so we looked at each other and agreed, and this almost seems like such quaint days now. We looked at each other and we're like, well, when they get to 1,000 cases in New York, we'll leave. And that was like a decision. Right. And it got to 50, and I was like, we're getting the fuck out of here. Like, this is insane. Like, there was no way that the 50 like tested cases were at all representative of where this was, and like people have been riding the subways for weeks and we were just screwed. So like it was I think that's a really true story. But
let me ask you a question. Do the numbers numb you? Like at this point, like when you're like, hey, cases decreased from 65,000 to 58,000, are you like, oh, that sounds pretty good?
The death numbers don't numb me. The diagnosis cases are a little bit like, I just don't know. Like, I'm just like, I can't, like, that's just, I don't know what to say about that, except that they're going to eventually, hopefully not, but like we're getting a little bit better with treatment, as Josh kind of walked us through. It's like all of these kind of multi-prongs attacked, right? We've got the vaccine hopefully coming. We're getting better at treating it so it's less fatal. Hopefully. We now know, like, I mean, like, all, as we said before, all of the things and the ways that it spreads and how we can protect ourselves if we're not assholes about it. And if we have some type of, like, effective governance sometime in the future. All of these things will help in, like, none of them are, like, the panacea, but all of them together will help diminish this and make it a manageable risk situation. Not get rid of the coronavirus, but make it a manageable risk situation. And so I guess I'm just kind of like, that's kind of how I feel about the numbers, is just as long as the deaths are not spiking, I guess I'm just almost like, I don't even know what to do with the number of cases anymore, because I do think that like some of the number of cases is that we have prevalence of testing. And I think that tons of people had the coronavirus earlier and maybe didn't know, or we know didn't know, and all of these other things.
So I think you're right. 100%. I just add a couple things. One is, in my view, there won't be a vaccine. You said it. There will be an arsenal of things that will develop over time. Convalescent plasma is probably the most promising. There'll be vaccines that work to varying degrees to get here at various times.
I I read a bunch about the convalescent plasma, and it didn't make it sound like it was that great of it was like kind of hit or miss.
Yeah, but hit or miss is sometimes hit.
Yeah, that's fair.
If it's effective a certain percentage of the time in the most serious cases, that lowers your death rate.
Yeah.
Everything is just think of it like a cocktail. Everything will contribute. I mean, when this was in China, if you were 75% of people on ventilators died, we're now at about 25% of people who go on ventilators die, just because of better venting procedures and because of slight improvements in drugs. So that's great. On the other hand, we still haven't learned and are still learning about the long-term and long-tail chronic disease consequences. So I'd say like the good news is the things we've learned about how the disease spreads and how to treat it have absolutely advanced. The bad news is what we've learned about what the disease does inside your body is really freaky.
It's so weird. Have you seen those photos of like a 22-year-old's lungs that were replaced? They gave her a lung transplant and they like showed the photos. They're absolutely horrific. They look like they actually look like nothing I've ever seen, but they're black and full of holes, and it's bizarre.
So if the CDC was doing its job better, we would have a much better handle on this right now. But I give you, like, if you look at SARS-CoV-1, a decade later, 40% of people who had it, including many who didn't show symptoms, have chronic fatigue and severe anxiety, mental health disorders. I talked to, it's all anecdotal because you're still collecting observational pieces, but there's people that go through this, and the lingering effects of kind of how this attaches into different organ systems is just really strange. Now there's gaps in our knowledge, but my point is this: if you think, hey, I'll just get the virus and get it over with, I'm not in that camp. I'm really not.
I completely agree with that. I'm like 110% in that camp. I'm like, this is not something, I don't know what this is going to do to my body long term. No one does. Yeah. I'm really curious what you think we do to turn the South around in terms of like quelling this current surge that we're all that like is happening in the U.S. Okay, so let's assume that the federal government can't be a player in this game. Is it just up to the governments? Is it up to people? Is it up to like, if you could like triage the things that you would do or have an individual do on their own without government interference, what would you have them do? Stay home?
Well, look, so here's what I think happened. So they're going to have I think they're plateauing in the South, but I'm worried that it's going to be a long and flat and kind of not so steep decline, because they're not going to do the severe actions that they did in the Northeast. And so they'll limp along. And when you limp along, the averages get really deceiving, because it'll turn out that when you live in the woodlands outside of Houston or some Scottsdale, a nice suburb outside of Phoenix, people will like be able to stay home and they'll be fine. But like you go to Yuma and some of these farm labor camps, or you go to San Quentin in California, or you go to the Hopi reservation, and it's like 90% of people have it. And if you're like farm laborer in Imperial County, California, you're living in a trailer with 4 other people, possibly your grandmother. You're getting in a pickup truck with 9 other people to go, and then you're picking crops all day, and it's 105 degrees, so you're not wearing a mask. And so, like, these numbers, I worry, are going to increasingly coming from these places that people don't see every day, because it's the people picking our food or in the grocery store. And then we think, okay, well, here's my other favorite thing. Let's isolate the old people. Let's just isolate the old people. And I listen to that and I go, okay, I got 2 problems with that. First of all, it's just not nice. Okay, how long are we going to isolate you for? You can't do anything anymore? I don't get it. And the second part of it is, it's impossible. And when the governor's staff in Texas told me that they were going to isolate the nursing homes, And now 40% of their cases are in nursing homes because you can't effectively isolate people
that
completely.
need care from younger people.
What's that?
That rely on care from younger people.
Right. So I mean, we had somebody who was driving through, and they came over, and they were socially distancing, and they're like, "We're going to go see our friends up at the lake in Minnesota," and my cousin's there, and she's a nurse, and she's great. I'm like, "Oh, that's great. Well, thank her for all she does." And they're like, "Yeah, no, we have a question for you. She goes to the bar every day after she leaves the hospital."
Great.
And I'm like, "She goes to what?" She's like, "Yeah, her and all her nurse friends go to the bar in town." And I'm like, "Okay, I think that we got a problem here." And she's like, "Yeah, I think," because she's trying to figure out if she should socially isolate from them. And it's like, we're so the spread is not that hard to imagine. I've got a 22-year-old and an 18-year-old, right? So I understand that these guys don't feel threatened by this at all. They feel threatened by me, but they don't feel threatened by the virus.
So we have a question from Barbara, who I'm having trouble getting up on the screen, so I'm just going to read it. Should we be opening schools in August, especially if local school districts are seeing their COVID cases rise? If so, how? What measures need to be absolutely in place to reopen and stay open? And if not, when should we open them? In Colorado, a majority of educators do not want them to open. So what are your thoughts on school reopenings?
So we have this thing in our head where okay, when I went to school, it was around Labor Day, and it was right after I went to Home Depot and bought my notebooks. And we didn't have Home Depot when I was a kid. But
why would you buy your notebooks at Home Depot? That is
Office Depot. Office Depot.
Office Depot. Okay.
Office Mac. Yeah, no, they've got
not to fact check you, but
big
that's
cardboard concrete notebooks at Home Depot. You cut them, and we used to make them
out of 2x4s that you bought
with
at
a
Home
2x4 and a saw, and then we'd carry them in. You didn't do that?
No.
So, yeah, we had it rough when we grew up. We did. My parents took us to all the wrong stores. The thing that is why August? Why September? Because we clearly don't know. If you're in a community where you've got cases that are growing, as it sounds like the questioner's question was, then the right answer is wait till it's safe and then open. I mean, we made up September, we made up August, and if we let our kids get a month behind, are we going to all of a sudden lose competitiveness with the Chinese because our kids are a month behind 7th grade? And so I say that a little bit flip because there are parents who need their kids to be in school, and so but it's probably not going to be the people who want to get rid of their kids and have them go the people who want their kids out of the house the most are white people in the suburbs who pretend to like their kids, but they'd really rather be at work because they can't stand having to teach them math. And the people they're the ones, but they have Wi-Fi and they've got a good setup, and they should probably have to keep their kids at home. And the kids who have to go to school for lunch or because their parents are hourly workers or whatever, they should have first call on being there. The educators, I think, uniformly are feeling are we the sacrificial lambs here? Are you, what about us? And they're right.
I was on this fascinating call with last night with a friend who is a teacher in New Mexico, in Santa Fe. She's actually an administrator now. She moved up, but she was just saying the amount of bullshit that it is that all of the school board is zooming into a meeting to hold a meeting on whether or not the teacher should be forced to teach their kids in person and take that risk, and they're not even willing to take that risk to meet with each other, and how ridiculous that was. The other thing that she said, which is interesting because I do want to talk to you about, you said something about the tribal nations, which is just she said that they have been really, really hyper conservative about this since the very beginning, before there were any cases in New Mexico, because of protecting the tribal populations. But that might just be Santa Fe. that might not be other places.
And South Dakota was your mileage varies, but Navajo Nation's obviously been decimated. And the podcast, my podcast in the bubble, we just donated $14,000 to the Navajo Nation. We donate our proceeds, so if people listen to the podcast, we just do that.
And just so that people know, what is the podcast called? Where can people find it? And
it's called In the Bubble, and it's me and my son, who's 18, and I have to basically coax into talking, and then we have all kinds of good guests. Next week we have Susan Rice, and we had Larry Brilliant, as she said, which is good. But I mean, the thing about schools, like, they don't know. I mean, like, you talk to the mayors, they're all calling, and they don't have an answer. And so for Trump to say we've got to do this everywhere, which is like, and he's supposed to be a federalist, I think. I'm not sure. It's like, what is that supposed to mean? And then my son's college. My son's gonna be a freshman. That's supposed to mean? Right.
Like, I have no idea.
And then my son's gonna be a freshman in college, and they're like, the first thing they sent us is, okay, so here's the plan. Show up. You're gonna be in a dorm. We're gonna put you in a single. You're not allowed to communicate and connect with any other students. You're not going to go to any classes. You're going to take them all online. We're going to deliver a box lunch to your dorm room. And so he's like, wait a minute, Dad, I'm supposed to go to school, sit in a dorm by myself, take time, not leave, and I can't socialize. There's no clubs and no sports. And it's like, he's like, why are they doing that? I'm like, it's called tuition. It's called tuition. So these schools are like, they're not all solving for the right thing. And which is the kids' experience. And look, it's hard. There's no great answers. I mean, this is going to be a crazy year. We'll look back on it and go, well, we got through it.
Okay, I'm about to give you a chance, Andy, to praise President Trump's leadership.
What happened?
I just got a CNN alert. President Donald Trump announced Thursday there will be no Republican convention activities in Jacksonville, Florida.
Great.
Events in Charlotte, North Carolina will still be held. He said he would do an acceptance speech in a different form. I looked at my team and I said the timing for this event is not right. It's just not right to have a big convention. It's just not the right time. What's your reaction to that?
Good call. I mean, like, but you think about it, Ben, like, why be nominated if you're going to get your ass kicked? So, I mean, that's I think that's where he is right now. It's like, I can have the greatest nomination in the world and create all the images. I mean, I talk to the White House all the time. To their credit, they reach out to me, and their credit, they'll take my call if I've got something to tell them. And they have been working on him for, I'd say, weeks. I wouldn't say longer than weeks, but I'd say they've been working on him for weeks. That mask tweet, the Walter Reed walk, all this stuff, and I think they got to him. And look, I'm not assuming the best motives on Trump's part. I'm assuming the worst motives on Trump's part. But whatever the motives are, I think that's the right decision because it models behavior. If he can do that in Jacksonville, well, then why can't I do this? And then why can't I do that? So it's a good move.
And when the president does that, I think one of the other important things about it is that then they have to explain why. And that makes it a little bit more difficult for the DeSantises and the Kemps to behave in fashion contrary then to what the White House is saying. But I want to follow up on your interesting point that the White House is at the sub-presidential level. You have constructive interactions with them. A lot of the governors have sort of publicly praised the engagement of the vice president. How do you understand the dynamics of that task force? Is that basically a bunch of sane, reasonable people with an overlay of insanity on it? Or is it or is it person by person? Like, I mean, understanding that you're a Democrat and these people aren't your cup of tea, what are the dynamics of the thing?
Well, look, if Mitt Romney were president or George W. Bush were president, this would be far, far different. This is not a Republican thing, and maybe Democrats who don't agree with me, but this is a Trump thing. This is a competency thing. I had on my podcast Ron Klain, who was the guy who ran the Ebola crisis, and then after he was done, I brought on, just at the very end, I'm like, you know what I'm gonna do? I brought on Lonnie Chen, because he was Mitt Romney's health policy advisor.
Right.
And I said, okay, I want people to hear the guy that would be probably in that role if Romney were president.
Yep.
And guess what he sounded like? Ron Klain. Because it's not like anything about this should cause you to make it a political. Now I know it happened in an election year and so on and so forth. But what I think the president got wrong, and maybe he'll fix it, is I think the public can actually handle bad news if it's delivered straight. I think the public can handle if they feel like they're getting told the truth. And I think he messed that up. I think he viewed this as a reflection on him from the start, because that's just sort of his knee jerk. And I think he didn't have to. I think no one would have tagged it with him quite as much if he'd have just said, look, we're in a shitty situation. We're going to get through it, but we're in a tough situation, and stop throwing around blame. And I think people just didn't like seeing that in a crisis. Even the people that thought it was reasonably okay. I think the people on the task force individually are talented people. It's not well organized. And to be honest with you, and I say this, I mean, it's a bit JV. I mean, like Biden, Obama,
half of the competent people,
right.
Right.
Normally, I'd say, a lot of the best people wouldn't want to work for them. But during this crisis, a lot of people have raised their hands and shown up. Yeah. But it's not well organized. And it's like Obama and Biden and Dennis McDonough, who was chief of staff when I was there, used to be like, okay, who's the best person in the country? Let's find the best person in the country. Because it's kind of like a big deal, right? And instead you got like, okay, we just brought in a 34-year-old private equity guy who got a 740 on his SAT, and he's willing to work till 11 p.m. So that's the guy who's procuring our masks for us. And
I have a story for you about this.
You got a 740 on your SAT?
No. I've been lucky to do that.
Total.
No, total. So after 9/11,
no one cares about verbal. Sorry.
After 9/11, Congress, within about a week or a week and a half, 2 weeks, passed this very elaborate compensation scheme, the victims' compensation scheme, and it's actually an effort to save the airlines because they were afraid of massive litigation against the airlines, and so they thought if we can give a very generous compensation package to victims, right, but the condition is they have to forego their suits against the airlines of participation, then we can reduce the capacity of this thing to bankrupt the airlines. It was a super visionary piece of policy. Actually, it ended up being 96% of the victims participated in it. The compensation was fast and generous in a way that litigation is often not. And the reason it was so successful was that right after the bill passed, Ted Kennedy went to John Ashcroft and said, okay, I know he's a Democrat. I know he's one of my people. And he's really culturally different from you. But the person you need to hire to run this thing is a guy named Ken Feinberg. And Ashcroft did it, to his credit. Ken had a background in mass tort, alternative compensation schemes, black lung disease, etc., and asbestos stuff. And he was a sort of he's really culturally different.
The guy. He was the guy.
Yeah, and he ran the thing. And Ashcroft, and when you talk to Ken about it, he talks about what a bulwark of support Ashcroft was. And this is an example of like stepping up, getting the right people, and political leadership not asking political questions when they're not necessary. And and both of them, I mean, I think it's there are a lot of things that I think Ashcroft should get a lot of credit for, actually. And but just looking at that situation and saying, all we need here is exactly the right person, and there are no other questions. And so somebody who was a longtime Ted Kennedy staffer and confidant, who, by the way, went on to run the BP compensation scheme too. I mean, he did.
BP compensation scheme was also brilliant.
No, the whole this has become a really interesting model as a result of this stuff.
Yeah.
But there is something to be said for looking at a situation that isn't inherently political and saying exactly the question that you just described, which is, irrespective of politics, irrespective of anything we normally care about, who is the right person to do this? Right. And when you do that, you get better results.
Right. I said at the beginning of this, I'll get in a room with anybody who wants to save people's lives here. And that's Jared Kushner. And, there were some people that said, well, you're going to help solve this, which might get the president reelected. I said, it's not my objective, but I don't really care about that. I will tell you something, though. It's funny when you're listening to your story. When we had remember the whole kids in cages thing? Wasn't that long ago? I called the administration and said, look, I called the not the White House. I called the HHS, who's in charge of fixing it. And I said, you should get a bipartisan group of us together to oversee fixing this situation and oversee the process of helping kids find their parents and just clean the slate, say it should never have happened. Once we found out about it and got in our hands, cleaned up, depoliticized it. And the response I got was, White House would never allow that. So I'm like, okay, you're on your fucking own. You're on your fucking own.
Well, you can't make them. I mean, that's the terrifying part of the the executive. If you were actually dealing with unreasonable people, you're just never going to have But it almost makes my heart hurt to hear that someone tried to do that.
Yeah.
And it failed.
They have these bright lines, right? So if you're in a cabinet, you pretty much have carte blanche, except for where the White House chooses to draw its lines. And if it touches immigration, if it touches sexual health, if it touches women's health, if it touches reproductive rights, you're in your HHS. That's all the White House's domain. It's all Pence, and they don't even question it. They don't even question it. Yeah. Well, and that's they know that that's their political mojo. When push comes to shove, we have to keep the evangelicals happy. And I'm sure there's a Democratic equivalent, right, where it's don't screw the teachers union or whatever. So, there's totally
yes,
right. I'm sure there were stuff where
CIO or something like that.
Yeah, SEIU.
So we have a question, a very interesting question from somebody I just tried to bring in. Not sure if that was successful, so I'm going to read it. What do you think of the contract tracing apps? Oh, wait. Here is the questioner, so I'm going to let Sam ask his question.
Great question, Sam.
Thank you. Well, I thought it would be up your alley as well as Andy's. And that is, what do you think of contract tracing apps and our ability to manage, and similar to the one that Germany is using, for example, our ability to manage privacy concerns if we're trying to collect and aggregate things like GPS and social media contacts as part of our contact tracing?
Andy, what do you think? I have some thoughts on this, but go ahead.
So we live in an opt-in country, not an opt-out country. If you lived in an opt-out country or a you have to do it country, those apps have a lot of use. But if you live in an opt-in country, at best case, and we've done a lot of polls on this, the most you're going to get are 40% of people who are going to opt in. If 40% of people opt in, you have 16% effectiveness. Because if I have it and he doesn't, or he has it and I don't, it doesn't work. So technology is not going to be the silver bullet here. There's a lot of shoe leather involved. In terms of trust, the only people that people trust about as little as they trust the federal government are the big tech companies. Whether they should or shouldn't is another matter, but that's what you're dealing with. So I think some of the apps are pretty good. I think there is a vocal minority of people that don't like them. If you explain to people that they will help you get back to work faster, you could get 60 to 65% of people like them. If you say that the data only goes to your local health commissioner, you can get about 65% of people, but you can never really get more than that. And so that becomes part of the problem. Now, corporations can require their employees to use them, and that's helpful. And they do work. The NBA has a contact tracing app. They're down to 0 cases in the bubble there. And that's so I think they have some utility, but I think we shouldn't equate it with contact tracing, period, because you can do contact tracing with a lot of shoe leather.
So a couple of additional thoughts. The smaller the bubble that you're working with, the more effective the apps are as a general matter. And the efforts to make national ones have almost uniformly failed, even in the situations in which you're not dealing with opt-in. I mean, yes, you can be China and force people to do all kinds of things. I'm not talking about that. But even the Singaporean app has turned out to be less useful than it initially seemed. And so I think on the other hand, the very small scale, ones where you can have essentially 100% of people within a bubble using it, for example, a college or a university setting, probably has a lot of application there. I do think the privacy risks associated with it are overstated with respect to, at least with respect to ones that are well designed. They're not zero, but contact tracing is inherently a privacy invasive thing. It's an effort to find out everybody you've been in contact with. And it's not all that more invasive if you do it electronically and algorithmically than if you send people out to interview you and you tell them everybody you've been in touch with. So I'm not opposed to it. I have been waiting to see a really impressive iteration of it at scale. And I've been sort of surprised that over the months that this has developed, the medical progress has been way faster than we got remdesivir faster than we got a scalable app. And so I do think that should tell you something, but it's not on the privacy side. It's actually on the effectiveness side.
And can I just have one pile on a little? One thing,
Please.
Shouldn't surprise us that guess what? The Latinx community doesn't feel comfortable giving up their contacts, that they believe the information is going to go to ICE. Why would they possibly believe that? So, we have engendered this. There's a cost to engendering all of the mistrust that we have. Is now we're like, no, trust us now. Trust us this time.
There's, I don't actually, I know this is my area, but I've been, as is my wont, very slow to form an opinion on something that I don't actually know anything about until I can gather enough evidence.
That's not the American way.
I know. I know. It's also not like people just don't like you in general.
Your niche jerk faster, Kate.
How do you survive on Twitter?
I barely do. It's purely my good looks and my sense of humor.
But she's going to get tenure.
What did you say, Ben?
I said, but she's going to get tenure.
Yeah, maybe. We'll get tenure. Don't say that, Ben. Now you've jinxed me. But no, I do want to say that, we had Jonathan Zittrain on to talk about this at Harvard. He's been working on this this has been his raison d'etre since the COVID kind of came out. He's been working with Margaret Bardot on this. Like, they have a podcast that's starting, I think, on Tuesday. You should check it out. Like, I think it's similar. They modeled it after. It was very sweet. They modeled it after In Lieu of Fun. So they're going to be doing a similar type of like video webinar. So you should check it out. But they're going to be talking a lot about this, if this is something you're interested in. I will just say that, like, it doesn't actually surprise me that tech is slow to do this. As a person who is partnered with someone who has done all of the geolocation venue matching for Foursquare for the last like 9 years, Foursquare being the app that you like check into everywhere you are, and like it tells you on your phone the closest thing that you are possibly are to. And so it's actually hugely logy, really terrible, and like not particularly accurate, and never mind all of the privacy issues. So I'm sure that no one is really excited as a startup to jump on the liability of being subpoenaed by ICE or being, whatever else. Yeah. And so like, it just strikes me as like, this is actually not surprising to me at all. And I'm actually very happy that the crazy mentality of like, let's just ramp something up and put it out there in the world has actually not happened in this context.
So wait, rewind a second here.
Yeah.
Go back to, they modeled this after In Lieu of Fun. Okay, so describe what that means.
Yeah, we don't know either. So.
Okay, all right. So,
we started this on a lark 119 days ago.
We thought it was going to be like a month. I thought maybe 2 months.
Yeah, we said, we'll do this as long as lockdown is on, as long as quarantine's going.
You committed.
We have done it 7 days a week ever since. And we have a drink at 5 o'clock or 4 o'clock your time with somebody interesting. And we have a shoot the shit kind of conversation. There's a rule that all planning for the show goes on the show.
Because we don't have time to do anything else.
Because we both have jobs and stuff.
Yeah.
And so it could be like a break from life in quarantine.
So I would say that like normally if you're like it goes on longer than you want, your standards drop. But what I really admire about you guys is you started at the bottom of the barrel in terms of standards. So that like you couldn't,
we're still there.
Right. You couldn't possibly like let people down. It's not like right.
That's right. And we have like a super loyal, like we know like the viewers by name, it's like, the John Bordeaux's and Pauline from Montreal and Pontiac Silverado. I mean, these are our buds now.
Right. You're like having drinks with them every night.
Yeah. In fact,
it's kind of an amazing amount of stability in my life.
John Bordeaux describes In Lieu of Fun as happy hour with his imaginary friends.
Can I just say something before we kind of wrap, which is just that like both of you have incredible kids that have like kind of just done awesome things out of this. Like if your son is doing this podcast with you, I think it's a beautiful intergenerational thing. It brings in people that you wouldn't expect. It exposes it. There's a humility in being that age and also like a grandiosity about being that age that is both beautiful and kind of great and must be amazing next to like Susan Rice, right? And you are his dad, but you're also this person that knows Susan Rice. So that must be like an interesting thing.
So it's so funny. He said to me, Dad, at the beginning of the thing, Dad, we should do a podcast. So like if your 18-year-old says to you, Dad, we should, like whatever the rest of
whatever comes after it, unless it's like cook meth.
Right. You're in.
The answer is yes.
I don't know that's
illegal. Let's go give people COVID.
Right. So he's like, you talk to people all day long. Why don't you just have them on the show? And so I'm like, okay. So I'm like, so the idea of the podcast is it's 50% Winston Churchill, 50% Fred Rogers, 10% dad jokes. So that's like the form. And so like I have him on. So he's 18 and so we have Chelsea Clinton on. And I go, say hi to Chelsea Clinton. Meet my son, Zach. He goes, sup? You can do better than that. He goes, hey, Zach, how about a complete sentence from Mrs. Clinton? And he goes, it's nice to meet you. I really like your work. And so
you're convincing me to have kids every second.
Oh my God. So people they're like, he was either putting on the best imitation of an 18-year-old boy, but they're like he's probably faking it because nobody would do that. But he's coming out of his shell. He's coming out of his shell now more. And there's a feature on it called Zach's Facts because he's very analytical, and he'll like come up with like a fact about remdesivir or something that like nobody knows, and then he like defends his practice. So he's kind of growing. There's people on the side here who don't like Chelsea Clinton.
No, and they ignore the chat.
They don't like Susan Rice.
It's okay.
I want to say
it's actually just one
Susan
person.
Rice
was
a colleague at Brookings for a long time. Susan Rice is a super smart and interesting person, and I think extremely highly of Susan Rice.
Me too.
Ben, but talk about Ben. So do you know how Ben's kid?
I want to hear.
Like made masks, like. Basically did this amazing GoFundMe and bought all of these 3D printers and started to make masks like
so how old
days of the pandemic.
How old are your kids?
Well, this one's just turned 19, but he put together a big array of 3D printers and printed masks for public service organizations. We've had the art gallery that lent him the space to do it in has reopened, and so we had to dismantle the mask factory and put it in storage until we can find another location to rebuild it. But we will he's printed a lot of masks and basically put up a notice that any public service organization that needed masks should write to him, and he fulfilled all their orders. So it was a pretty neat little project.
Okay. Is he in college or is he college or high school?
Neither. He's on his own right now.
Got it.
In between. On his way to other things. But there is you guys give me hope. Like, I don't know. I can't think of a more a generation that would be more disenchanted.
We'll try to solve this for you. So are you contemplating whether you should have kids?
Possibly.
So can Ben and I vote? And can we decide here?
I feel like I'm not beholden to this, am I? I don't have to.
I think you are.
You're not do I have to give you my firstborn?
No, but I think you would be strongly encouraged to do what we suggest if you respect our opinions.
But you just both
hang on a second,
stories
Andy.
about your children.
I'm getting texts. I'm getting texts right now from Hannah Neprash about you. Do you know Hannah?
Oh, Hannah. Yeah.
No.
What kind of text are you getting?
She says I should ask you about Scotch.
Scotch. Okay.
What's do you have strong Scotch preferences?
Not really a Scotch drinker.
Huh. All right.
Hannah is, so that's probably why she asked. She really admires you and wants to know if you have Scotch preferences. Yes.
What Scotch?
Yeah. But you're not a Scotch drinker.
I'm not I would have loved to be I know how you said yesterday you would like to fashion yourself as a crossword puzzle guy. But you can't, you're just not that guy.
I'm not good at crossword puzzles.
Right. And I would have failed that test.
We're going to work on it, Ben.
But if I'd had you got to go $10,000 either way, is he a crossword puzzle guy? I'd go, he's for sure a crossword puzzle guy.
Totally not. And I can't draw anything.
And at one point I was like, I should be a Scotch drinker. Because there was a point in time where
problem that you don't like Scotch.
I fucking hate it. They're but do you like it peaty? I'm like, I don't like it.
I would not have it in a box. I would not have it with a box.
Right.
All right, we should wrap up.
Do what you want on the kids' front. You have my permission to decide for yourself.
Thanks. I'm going to. Seems like a pretty basic thing. I don't know. Everything's stressful right now. There was a really great tweet yesterday about someone saying what is this weird compulsion I have to make huge life choices in the midst of total uncertainty, moving out of my house, buying a house, having a child, having another child. So that's but it's a very weird, I think it's a very weird kind of it's a very weird conundrum we're all in. There's a desire to exert control and predictability over some aspect of our lives that we can't do normally. So I think that's it.
Absolutely. You got to keep living our life. And I want to just thank you guys. This is what you're doing for the people that you're doing so much for people. I mean, it's so important that people have a place, normalcy, and joy. No, totally serious.
Come back anytime.
Andy Slavitt, come and hang out. This was really fun. And now we know, are you drinking rosé?
No.
Oh, the Aperol Spritz. Next
Spritz.
time you do this, I'll plan ahead and I'll make myself an Aperol. I have the makings in my fridge, and I didn't do it if I knew.
I'll drink scotch, and we'll have Hannah Neprash on too, and she'll drink scotch, and we'll both just put social pressure on you to feel like you should be drinking scotch.
I'll be doing a crossword puzzle.
Yeah.
Yeah. We'll invite Ross on, and he can add the crossword puzzle.
My dad was good at that. I do the crossword puzzle. Yeah, no, it's for sure. I mean, I skipped breakfast so I could have my Aperol spritzes. So,
so tomorrow on the show, we have a special show. We're having my friend Callie, whom I have never met, and I don't know her last name, and I don't even know for sure if Callie's name is really Callie. She tweets under the under the handle NZ Urban Farm Girl NZ, I think. She is a resident of Christchurch, New Zealand, a very smart lady and a very interesting person whom I enjoy corresponding with on Twitter. And I asked her to come on to talk about New Zealand's COVID response and kind of how they pulled it off. South Island of New Zealand is somewhere where both Kate and I have spent a lot of time at different times in our lives, or at earlier times in our lives. And so excuse to talk about the South Island of New Zealand, talk to somebody who probably can't pronounce the word six in a fashion that is recognizable to American ears. And by the time we have Callie on, I'll have probably figured out what her name is, although maybe I won't bother. Andy Slavitt, it's been a great pleasure. Come back anytime. And Kate, until tomorrow.
Oh wait. We don't know. I thought this is genuine. I can never remember it. It's like, it's been 120 episodes. We don't have fun anymore. So in lieu of fun, we have Aperol Spritz.
Excellent. See you tomorrow, everybody.